Try.
Good evening. Welcome to the monthly agenda setting meeting and a special called session of the Unified Government of Athens-Clarke County. We value your interest and your participation in the proceedings of your local government. And if you would like an agenda, if you're here with us tonight, they're on the table just outside the exit doors and to the right. If you're watching remotely, you can get an agenda at accgov.com. No final action is taken on items tonight. Items discussed will be moved to the business meeting on September 4th for consideration and vote. If you have a cell phone with you tonight in the chamber or any other electronic device, would you please turn it off or to silent? There's several opportunities tonight for citizen input. We only accept public input on items that are on the published agenda at agenda meetings. I'll let you know at the appropriate time for each section on the agenda. Public comments are not accepted on staff reports related to the Planning Commission recommendations. A public hearing on these items will be held prior to the September 4th business meeting. Our rules of commission allow citizens 3 minutes for comment. There's a timing clock on Ms. Spratlin's desk, and actually there's little timing lights at the podium there too that will start out green. They'll turn yellow at 2.5 minutes, letting you know that your time is getting close to being finished. So please have your remarks done by the time it turns red so that I won't need to interrupt you. If you brought handouts, if you'll give them to Mr. Berryman, he'll make sure that we get them. And we'll begin tonight's meeting with our special call session. And the purpose of this set meeting is to approve a contract for J G Beacham Water Treatment Plant and consider any other item in order and enter into executive session. Will you call the roll, Ms. Spratlin?
Here. Here.
Wright.
Present.
Bailey.
Present.
Neesmith.
Present.
Bell.
Here.
Harrod.
Present.
Gertz.
Here.
And Hamby.
Here.
Thank you. Is there anyone visiting with us tonight that would like to comment on this item that's on the special call session? And that's related to supervisory control and data acquisition system upgrade for the J G Beacham, that's hard to say, J G Beacham water plant. Would anyone like to comment on that? Okay, seeing none, we'll come behind the rail. Do I have a motion to suspend the rules?
Motion to suspend the rules, please, Madam Mayor.
Have a motion to have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Would anyone like to offer a motion or open discussion on that this time?
I make a motion that we approve option 1A and B.
Second. Have a motion to have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and there's nothing else that I know of that's in order that can be brought tonight, unless some of y'all have something I don't know about.
Just executive session, we covered that, didn't we?
Not yet.
Motion, we enter into executive session?
Okay.
Second.
Have a motion, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Have a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, guys. We will now move on to our normal agenda setting meeting. We'll start with our consent agenda, and we only have 2 items on our published agenda. And if anyone would like to speak on either one of those 2 things, it's items 1 and 2 on our agenda tonight. This would be the time to come talk to us. Okay, seeing none, we'll come behind the rail. Would anybody like to remove either one of those items?
I just have a comment on number
Sure.
2.
Anybody else? Okay, let's go ahead and hear the comment rather than...
Yeah, I was reading through it, and I think it's very thorough, and I like the way that there's going to be a checkpoint every year with the committee that works so hard on this. And in relation to some of the health concerns, I was thinking about how the environment for mosquitoes is pretty prominent right now with all the rain and the warm weather, and I was wondering if we could get maybe a budget consideration by the next meeting on whether we could go back to where we had the briquettes for the anti-larva mosquito larvae. We used to give those out at the fire station, and I think for the community to have that as something to help us with the wet, warm environment that we have and cut back on some of the mosquito, it's kind of prime for that. And if that's something, I think we had to cut that in recent years because of budget, but I don't know what implication that is.
We can provide y'all staff perspective on that. I think there were some issues with the efficacy of it as well.
Okay.
But I'll share that with the entire mayor and commission, and we can go from there.
Okay, thank you. And other than that, I think it should go on consent.
Okay. This is a time for citizen input on the other old and new business items, and those are items 3 through 12 on our agenda. Would anyone like to speak to one of those items?
Tyler Dewey, 1075 West Broad Street. I submitted written comment on items 4 and 5, but up here at the podium, I just want to talk quickly about item 5. As was presented to the public, the new recommendation is to have a sort of pilot program or temporary project to lay out the two-way protected bike lanes for like 30 days to let people see how they work in practice, which I think is a great idea, and something that is nice to see Transportation Public Works try out for projects like this. A lot of the times, a lot of concerns about them are just because they're a new type of infrastructure that Athens might not have, but work and are being adopted widely across the country. And oftentimes, as we see in other cities, oftentimes the first one down is the hardest one to get. And then once we start to see the infrastructure laid down, people get comfortable with it. People see how nice it is for both people walking, people riding bikes, and even sometimes, oftentimes, people driving. You know, it builds momentum for future projects. So we're just really excited to see that project come forward with that 30-day trial. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dewey. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is John Jefferson. I live at 554 Boulevard. I have lived and biked on Boulevard for 3 years now, ever since moving to Athens, and it's a neighborhood and a street and an experience that I love. I'm really excited to see some of the safety improvements that are planned for Chase Street and Barber Street and the intersection of Boulevard with those streets. I do, however, have concerns about the proposed buffered bike lanes for Boulevard. I've spoken with a lot of my neighbors about this. In fact, I posted visuals of the proposed striping and asked for comments, and I got 10 pages of comments from my neighbors on Boulevard on the Facebook post. Almost all of them were opposed to the idea of simply striping as a way to try to address traffic issues on Boulevard. The consensus of almost everyone that I've talked to is that the buffered bike lanes and striping on Boulevard is an expensive solution in search of a problem that we don't really have on Boulevard. It's such a wide street. I have never in 3 years had an experience where I felt unsafe or menaced by a car while I was biking on Boulevard. What I do feel menaced and threatened by as a homeowner, as a pedestrian, and as someone who's surrounded by kids and pets on Boulevard is the volume of traffic and the speed of traffic on Boulevard. And in my belief, buffered bike lanes and striping aren't going to slow down traffic. I think what we need are some more aggressive traffic calming measures, not only to slow traffic, but to discourage people from using Boulevard as a high-speed cut-through to avoid Prince Avenue. So I would encourage you to broaden your perspective on the Boulevard portion of the the traffic and biking plan, so that those issues can be looked at in a more thoughtful and careful way. We have a traffic study that's scheduled for September 10, and I think that data will be very important and interesting to look at. And I'm certainly happy, and a number of my neighbors are happy to engage with the traffic engineering and public works folks to engineer a good solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jefferson. Anyone else wish to speak to us? A couple of new folks here with us, or not new folks, but new to the meeting tonight. We're in the process of having public input, and if either one of y'all would have anything you'd like to say to us, we're taking input on old and new items. So we're taking input on old and new items. Did y'all come to speak about anything tonight or just to listen? Yes. No? Okay. Well, we don't accept input except what's on the agenda tonight. This is for us to decide what's to go on to the business meeting agenda. At our business meeting, at the end of our business meeting, we accept 3 minutes from any citizen on anything they want to speak about. Okay. Anyone else? Don't want to leave anybody out. Okay, we're going to come behind the rail, and we'll start with item number 3, which is the Boley Drive pump station and force main. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Staff did a little bit of research for us, kind of based on some questions from our prior meeting, specifically looking at the prospect of a vacuum system. And what they found generally is that given the topography on this site, as well as given the volume of septage that would be coming from a commercial facility, in this case an amphitheater, the vacuum system isn't an appropriate mechanism. And so I'll be making a motion for approval of the staff recommended option next time around. What I would note is just kind of over the long horizon. Of course, this was a location where at one point, 8 years ago and prior, that there were plans for a sewer line, a gravity sewer line, that would have much more tightly hugged the river than this pump line plans on doing. So this really kind of pulls back from that location and travels essentially across the loop to tie into a gravity line, given the proposal in front of us.
Okay. Mr. Smith.
I concur with Kelly's comment about it, vacuum system not being appropriate. However, one of the companies that installs these types of system offered a citizen three items that would help with the mitigation of the dangers of these pump systems. And I'm meeting with Public Utilities on Friday, I believe, to discuss this. And those 3 items are: the pump station needs to have a top-of-the-line monitoring system that shuts off automatically when a failure occurs. It also needs to have an oversized holding capacity that would allow it to handle 3 to 4 hours of storage to allow time for repairs. And it has, and the force main is double wall. The sleeve surrounding the pipe needs to be connected on both ends as well to ensure the second layer of protection. So Mr. Haynes and I are meeting with Frank on Friday to discuss these things. So I may have a commission-defined option.
Okay. Well, we definitely won't put that on consent then.
No, ma'am.
Anybody else want to discuss this? Item number 4 is the Chase Street corridor plan, and that's, I believe, Ms. Link, Mr. Gertz, both. It's in your areas.
Yeah. I want to thank Mr. Jefferson for his comments and for all the work he's put into helping to inform his neighbors on Boulevard about this concept plan being proposed, because the public had not really been informed that this concept was being proposed. The overall concept, including Chase, Boulevard, Oneida, and about 1.5 miles of Barber Street, was developed in reaction to the 3-laning of and bike laning of Chase Street a couple years ago, and which posed some backup problems with cars coming on and off the loop. And I think that they did a great job in coming up with a concept to deal with that problem with some roundabouts. And I look forward to seeing more development of that. But instead of coming up with a way to accommodate bike traffic, they decided to divert it through the neighborhood and down Barber Street through 1.5 miles of the chicken plant and industrial territory. Folks on Boulevard they don't have concerns about bike safety really on Boulevard. I've never felt unsafe riding my bike on Boulevard, and I'm not a very confident cyclist. And that's what we're hearing. It is a historic neighborhood, and folks appreciate the wide historic feeling of the street and the granite curbing. And the only problems that we do see are these occasional speeders, which every neighborhood sees. And we really, folks on Boulevard would really like a broader discussion of the needs for that street, the needs for traffic calming, the needs to discourage cut-through traffic, and also make things a bit safer for cyclists. My primary concern about the plan is that I don't feel like it's been properly publicly vetted. There hasn't been a public presentation of it in which the public was allowed to offer feedback on this plan as it sits before us. I honestly would like to see it pulled for that public input, or I would like to come up with a CDO that kind of tweaks it a bit to make sure that certain segments of the concept are developed more before they're able to move forward.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate it. A slightly different perspective on the plan. I mean, at least one of the things that I really do like about the plan broadly is that it considers Barber, Boulevard, Chase, and Oneida in the broader context of the adjacent neighborhoods. And so we're thinking not just about a segment of roadway, but how do you get to that segment of roadway from other places if you're on a bike or if you're a pedestrian? How do you get through it and how do you get onto somewhere else? So specifically here, it provides you the opportunity to say, well, if you live at or near the corner of Barber and Boulevard and you're interested in going to much of the forthcoming development that's happening on Newton Bridge Road, how do you get there safely? And how do you get there in a manner where you're explicitly shown that you can get there on a bicycle? How do you get to the Southern Mills property from that location? And so one of the things that's beneficial about having some striping of some variety or some explicit painting is being just that, explicit, and letting people of any level of bike experience know, hey, this is a place where you can get to other places. So rather than just thinking, how do I get from Chase Street to Street along Boulevard, thinking about that outlying terrain as well. And so in that regard, I like this very well, given what it provides us in association with simply the real estate we have to work with. As we've talked about, one of the challenges is that there's right now a bridge on Chase Street that goes underneath the railroad tracks, and so that's just geometrically constricted, and so there's nothing we can do about that unless we can bend the laws of physics. So I think, we've got a great plan given what road surface is on the ground right now. I'm very fond of kind of the continued use of roundabouts at the loop interchanges as well. The other thing I'd say about public input is I attended 2 public sessions, both at the Snipes Water Building. One was a more conceptual session at which about 3 different plans were proposed, and then the other kind of involved essentially a version of what we see in front of us. And then we've had this on the public radar for 2 months with great opportunity for public input, and certainly some friends and neighbors and constituents have emailed me, but I've not had the sense of a lack of public input opportunity up to and including tonight.
Mr. Neesmith.
Well, I do have the concept that there hasn't been adequate output from staff to the public. This is a complex plan with lots of very unique concepts and roundabouts. Roundabouts like these we've never seen before. They have to be explained. You can't throw a chart up on the internet and expect people to understand them. I have visited businesses along that area, and the only time they saw this concept is when I showed it to them, and they had a lot of questions. I also note that my concern about turning left onto Rose Street off of Chase Street has not been addressed here. At least explain why we can't turn left off of Chase onto Row and how one gets to the businesses on Rose Street from Chase Street when they're heading south. So I think this is a good concept, basically. I do. But I also believe it is our duty to be certain that the concept is understood by the people that it most affects, which frankly are those businesses around these roundabouts. And that there has, as far as they tell me, there's been no outreach to them, other than the first meeting after the problem that we had. And so I'm going to ask this to be tabled. I can't support a commission-defined option because a commission-defined option is not going to solve the problem if we haven't informed our citizens in this area who it most affects.
I have a question, if you don't
Mr.
mind,
Chamberlain,
Madam Mayor.
yes,
It's
sir.
about the public input. So I'm reading in Facts and Issues number 4, the Trace Street corridor process included 3 public forums, multiple stakeholder interviews, and technical analysis of the area. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out here, we can have all these announced public inputs, but and get the notices, and if people don't show up, decisions are made by those who show up. So from that standpoint, Manager, was about to call you Manager Reddish, I'm sorry, Manager Williams. Could you, I've got to get over that. I know it has been 5 years, hasn't it? Manager Williams, would you just, do you have a list of how many people were at these forums? Maybe a list of the stakeholder interviews that you conducted? I mean, I just think that would be helpful for us to understand the outreach that may have been done.
We can generate that list. And I will say that all the businesses on Chase and many from Row were notified about this process as well.
Anita?
I'd have to go back and look for that. But I'll give you all that information.
Okay.
I attended, Kelly didn't stay for the whole time, but they looked pretty well attended. So. Any further comment or questions on this item? Okay, we'll go to item number 5, which is similar. Barnett Shoals Road lane reconfiguration. And this is, I'm not sure whether this is Dickerson or Harrod's district. Harrod, okay.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. So I've been thinking about this a lot. I drive through here a lot. I went out there again today. And I'm not opposed to looking at a 30-day experiment, but I do have some concerns more generally about this particular solution to getting bicycle and other traffic through here. My preferred option is to have a multi-use path on between the vet school and the current road, because I think that is safer for cyclists. But I also think that given the amount of vehicular traffic that goes through that intersection, which is only going to increase when Kroger gets redeveloped at whatever point that happens, but it's coming. And so I'm concerned that in terms of the long term, if we do go to the plan that is suggested here, that this intersection will be at certain times of the day, and it gets backed up at particular times of the day, that this intersection will really cease to function in terms of the flow-through of traffic. And much as I love bike lanes, I voted for every single bike lane project that's come in front of us since I've been on the commission. This one is giving me some pause for thought, because I think that having spent 20-plus years living out in this part of the county, this is an intersection that I just don't know that we can do everything that we want to do with this particular intersection. So that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess I'm a little bit, I don't know if concern's the right word, but curious about the $25,000 cost to do the 30-day test. That seems like an off, in this, I mean, it's a lot of money to me. I just know we can do a lot with 30 or 25,000. Is there a reason why we can't get like a cost sort of analysis or whatever you want to call it of the multi-purpose path that Commissioner Harrod is speaking about, and how that could work as an option as well? Is it in here? I'm sorry. Maybe I should read this whole PDF stuff that Manager Reddish sends to us all the time.
That guy's a problem.
It's about 400 and
that's a lot more than 25,000.
480 something thousand dollars.
It's more expensive on one side of the road or the other,
460.
but it's in the $300,000 to $400,000 range.
So it's more expensive on one side, but it's easier to do because there are fewer property owners that we would have to negotiate with.
Ms. Dickerson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to comment similarly to Commissioner Harrod, and that is, I drive that road fairly often as well, and I even come in tonight, I drove it on purpose to see, and there's enough traffic in those lanes that if we were to single that out, they would be wrapped around the corner at College Station coming around 5 o'clock. So the concerns I heard, and I went to the meeting, Commissioner Hare was out of town at the time, but I went to the meeting, and there were a lot of people there that did voice some concern about whether or not, if we moved it from 3 lanes to 2 lanes and a center turn lane with the bike lanes, whether or not it could adequately handle the flow of traffic. And there are, I mean, as Commissioner Harris said, there are some alternatives. One is the one that I like, which is taking that western sidewalk side where the vet school and the fire department are, and taking that existing sidewalk. I mean, there's sidewalks on both sides of the road there, so it's not like we're not taking away a sidewalk from anybody, and a multi-use path could be used for people to walk on too. It is a little bit more expensive than the other side, but there's a lot more room on that side as well. The other alternative that came up that was mentioned in some of the emails that I forwarded to staff was widening the road. I mean, we widen the road on College Station, and so we go from a really wide road with bicycle lanes on both sides to a very narrow road on our side, on that Barnett Shoals segment. And I too, I don't have a problem with bike lanes. I mean, I don't see that many people, and I realize that maybe part of it is that it is a busy road and people don't feel comfortable. Maybe it's that there aren't as many bicyclists on that end. I don't know, but I don't have a problem with it. But I do think, and I know Commissioner Harrod's mentioned this several times, that providing a buffered bike lane would be more enjoyable for a lot of people anyway, and we wouldn't have to give up anything for the cars that need those lanes. We could accommodate both of those things. So I did ask the manager, and I know the bike ped master plan hasn't been approved yet, and I'm not 100% sure. I guess this was one question I did have for the manager, whether or not, because there are sidewalks on either side, does the bike ped master plan, did it identify bike lanes for this road, or did it just assume we were going to get them because we were looking at resurfacing? You follow me? I didn't have time to go back and look in the plan. So I don't know if it did, but we do have T-SPLOST money, and I guess I understand we can't leapfrog, but I think the thing we need to think about is when we've got projects like these that come forward, we can't always know. Maybe we can, if staff had a list, maybe we would know that these are resurfacing projects, and maybe there would be an alternative that a criteria be set up to say, well, if we're resurfacing that road, this one gets more points because we're fixing to resurface it anyway. And therefore the money, moves it, elevates it. I don't know. I mean, that's something to think about. And we won't have that happen at every time. Every time we have a road come up, it may not be in a situation like this one, but I do think it lends itself to consider that. So.
Okay, so what do y'all want from staff before our next meeting?
Funding options. I mean, we actually feel like T-SPLOST would be a great way to use this money. I think bikers would find it more enjoyable not to be sharing the road next to a car. It is, I mean, we are further out, so we have to use cars to get in. I mean, there are some people, and I don't have a lot of people biking all the way from Morton Road in, but people do bike in from, Barnett Shoals in. And I think it would be a safer alternative and more enjoyable. And we do have, the land is there to do it. I would definitely do it on the western side, though. I don't think it would make sense to do it on the other side. There's too many parcels, and you're going to be cutting off taking out their front yards, which would be a bigger thing. But I prefer that over changing, I don't even think that we ought to try a demo project, because I think that's just going to make people angry. And you got to change their habits for 2 months or a month or something, and that's just going to make people crazy. So.
Well, Melissa, I'm going to get you, but just one of the things I'd like to know before we go further is, in consideration of the multi-use path that the two commissioners on that side of town are advocating, do we have adequate right-of-way, or would we have to buy additional right-of-way too? It's a question we need to get answered. So. Melissa.
I just want to point out that the bike lane project on Boulevard, the price tag is about $500,000. That's money that probably could go to a proper shared use path on Barnett Shoals, and some of the problems on Boulevard could be solved much more cheaply with some speed bumps and a crosswalk or two, which is what the residents of Boulevard actually, for the most part, would prefer.
I believe that's called a win-win.
Yeah.
I'll give you some money.
I missed that. Is that right?
This is coming about because of repaving that needs to be done. This is part of our policy that we consider a 4-lane going to a 3-lane for the very reason. And if we're having some confusion on the methodology because we haven't approved the bike pedestrian master plan yet, I think that what we've been told is this fits into what has been studied for almost 2 years now by that group. So I'm trying to understand if it's happening too quick, but it has to happen quick because the paving needs to be done because of the detrimental state of the surface of it.
Weather-wise.
And timing and weather-wise type thing. And I understand wanting to have a temporary try of it as a good solution because of what happened on Chase Street when we were doing things behind the rail and making decisions. And so I understand that is a good way to go because I think it does prove a lot of things for a lot of people instead of us being gun shy of what has, from what I understand, fits in what's coming before us in a bigger scheme. And so we've got these two examples that we're trying to do before that plan comes forward, but I believe it's been presented that it's part of that.
So to answer Commissioner Dickerson's question, bike facilities were identified in this area in the bike ped plan, but no specifics. That would come later, when you develop the concept for the segment.
Mike?
So would this bike master plan not be welcoming, I guess, to a multi-purpose path along here if it can work out? I mean, certainly if it's costing $500,000 to do something over on Boulevard, it does kind of make sense to try to work something out over here that would.
I'm not sure where the $500,000 figure came from.
Yeah, I was trying to figure that out.
But I will say that at bike facilities, I think the bike ped master plan would receive this as a concept.
Favorably?
It's a bike facility.
Right.
So that would be your decision as a body. What I'm told is that it's not one of the ranking priority segments.
Well, I guess I would say to that, and this, I may put it in different language than Commissioner Dickerson, and I get that, and I can appreciate that. But if we're spending money to repave a road, and then 5 years later, it all of a sudden rises that this project, we've done everything. If there's 5 projects, this is number 5. We've done all the 4 first, and this one rises is all of a sudden number 1. We've wasted a lot of money already in repaving the road. Y'all follow me? So if it, I understand if you're saying that it would leapfrog over other projects, but there ought to be something in place to where if you just got to take the situation as it comes to us. The situation now is we need to repave Barnett Shoals Road. If 5 years down the line, we're going to go back and revisit Barnett Shoals Road and have something that has a multi-use path and that we got to pay for, why not do it all at once to save the money? That's kind of the way I'm looking at it here. Am I looking at it wrong or not?
Well, if you had bike lanes that were functioning, you could argue you wouldn't really need the multi-use path unless perhaps it was part of something like the Firefly where you're connecting
right.
long distances.
And could it be? That's the thing. Could it be that, or could it be safer?
But the process is not necessarily to go to 3 lanes and bike lanes. It's to evaluate it to see if that's what you do need to do. And what I'm hearing is there's a lot of question in that evaluation as to whether we want to do that. Do we want to put $25,000 into a 30-day temporary? So, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and I tried to go back, and so I apologize if I missed it, but did we get a copy of that traffic study? I didn't see that. I'd be interested in seeing the traffic study.
Because it'd be a shame to 3-lane it and then have to come back in a few years and add lanes to it because it's not adequate. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
I'd be in favor of going through that evaluation and doing that pilot project. I really would. I think we need to do that more, especially in places where people really aren't biking and ask the question, would you actually bike if there were facilities there? But I do believe that, if at all possible, if the room is there, we should go for these shared use paths, the ones that are actually off the road, because I think you'll get even more folks biking. Drew Raisler did meet with a handful of Boulevard residents last night and talked to us and said, actually Boulevard is way low on the priority list. It's just appearing here because, we're doing this whole corridor study. But yeah, I feel like it's worth having that evaluation and that pilot project to kind of get a sense of who out there and how many people out there would bike if they did have some additional safety. And we could presume that if it was a shared use path, you'd probably even get way more people.
I think that's probably one of those things, build it and they'll come.
Yeah.
It's, quite honestly. Yeah. Andy?
Well, thank you. I mean, just to follow up, I mean, I've long thought that, we have a policy, we widen roads to put bike lanes in them, and we keep the sidewalks the same width. And I think we would get many more people riding bicycles if, instead of widening the road, you widened the path and made it a multi-use path, because you've then at least got some significant distance between a 2,000-pound vehicle that's traveling at 40 miles an hour or something and somebody on a bicycle. So my preferred solution on a lot of these things has always been, if it's possible, do a multi-use path rather than widening the road to add the bike lanes to it. I think it makes, I'm not a cyclist, but I have to imagine that cyclists would find riding on a multi-use path a lot more inviting, a lot less dangerous than riding on 4 feet on the side of a road where traffic's going by at 40 miles an hour.
Well, I used to be in, if I might not have quit, had I had a multi-use path to use, because I used to ride on Prince Avenue a lot, and I wouldn't consider it now. Mr. Williams, do you have a feel for what the commissioners need before our next meeting? Okay. Y'all ready to move on? Okay. Item number 6 is execution of memorandum of understanding with AT&T, and we have an AT&T. Paul Chambers is here tonight. If y'all have any questions, but are there any questions or concerns about this contract? Yes, sir.
Well, we've talked a lot about these cell tower right-of-ways, and I just haven't had the opportunity. I can read this, and I've read it, but I don't know how it fits into the other proposals that we've seen and the model legislation that we've seen from ACCG. And I feel like I don't know what I'm voting for, and compared to what we've already voted for. You know what I'm saying?
Can you tell us where there are any differences from the model and from the previous?
I can point those all out. It's essentially the same. There's some small, well, I will say this. Crown Castle was more about fiber runs, and we've seen them being installed. Mobility and AT&T are more similar to each other than, say, Crown Castle. But the language is basically the same. It's inspired by the work that we did with the Georgia Municipal Association, and there have been negotiations with each company. So they vary slightly, but in substance, not really. But we can call those out.
Okay. Anybody else have questions? I have a real, it may be a minor question, but it's one of my pet peeves. There's one of the bullet points under 7 is AT&T has no right to cut or trim any AC/CGov trees. And I've got a note here, what about trees on private property but beyond the right-of-way? Because I know Georgia Power exercises the right to cut beyond the right-of-way in trees in private yards. And so I want to see how that fits in with this.
So you're asking if AT&T has a right to cut private trees?
Yeah, beyond the right-of-way, because, and of course, it may be a totally different rationale with Georgia Power and AT&T, but with AT&T, you have the county's right-of-way, but I think they say they have the right to go 10 feet beyond the county's right-of-way to trim trees. They feel like they're a problem with the lines. So, we're saying they don't have a right to trim AC and CGov trees. I'd like to protect trees in private property as well. Okay, y'all ready to go to the next? Well, we could put this on consent agenda because I don't know that my question is that it's going to hold it off, or do y'all want to still leave it on?
I'll leave it on because I want Blaine to answer my questions.
Oh, okay. Mariah, did you have your hand up? I thought I saw somebody's hand over there. Okay, y'all ready to move on to 7? Legislative Review Committee report, and Commissioner Neesmith, you want to tell us about that?
Yes, ma'am. When the Legislative Review Committee was working on the food truck ordinance and license fees, we discovered something we didn't know, which was called the itinerant merchant permit, which is basically anyone who's selling, even on private property, has to get an itinerant merchant permit. But we weren't requiring the food trucks to get an itinerant merchant permit. So we decided to smooth all that out a little bit, and that's what this comes to. So What we're doing is we're removing the $156 additional fee to any vendor, including the itinerant merchant permit. Well, we're removing the $156 additional fee to the food truck permit. And we're giving the food trucks an itinerant merchant permit with their public property. I'm doing a terrible job of explaining this. Let me start over. If
You sound like me tonight.
I
Just
just,
vote on what's in front of you.
yeah, vote yes, okay?
Actually, y'all did a good job. of
If
blending those two things.
when they get a public food truck permit, which allows them to sell food trucks to park on certain public land, we're reducing the price by $156. And it includes an itinerant merchant permit. And we will require food trucks to have an itinerant merchant permit if they don't have a public parking permit. So if they want to go to a private event, which right now they do for nothing, they will have to get this itinerant merchant permit, as any other person selling any other thing must do.
Well, when I put this back in for review, one of the reasons was because we had all the concern from some of our brick and mortar people. Did y'all have any concern expressed at the committee meetings about?
No.
So evidently they don't feel threatened anymore.
Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, we did not have any feedback on that, but what we did study was the price to operate a food truck in other municipalities and other areas, and we're pretty high. And we only have one right now, but yet there's food trucks all over privately. So the itinerant merchant category, we studied that because it was relevant. And if I'm correct, the chart that's on here might need to be updated on 233, because wasn't the $75 each trimester? So we've got an annual fee of $515, but yet the itinerant merchant is listed as $75, but yet that was trimester. So we might need to put in this chart the rate of these so that it's comparable with it. And when I look at $25 for the sidewalk sale, it makes, I don't know if that's quarterly or trimester, but so that if we update the chart on that, I think it'll be clear as a comparison.
Yeah, it absolutely needs it, because if you're looking at that, you don't know, is that each time you have a sale on the sidewalk?
Right, and promoting that if you have the truck, the mobile food vendor unit license, then you're good for the public places that we've defined in ordinance, as well as it covers being on private, so that we're trying to get everybody to where they're categorized, because we know that there's more than one food truck operating.
That's a good point. I'm sorry, let me just say this, and I'll get right.
You're going to anyway, so go
I
ahead.
am. If a food truck gets a public permit, it includes the itinerant merchant's permit, so they can also sell on private property.
Yeah. And we're basically treating all of our folks the same.
That's correct.
Kelly?
I just was noting in the administrative document here under section 662, it notes that these permits in the schedule below shall be issued on an annual basis, and that no permit shall be issued for more than 1 year at a time. So
these are all annual?
This is calling out a 1 year permit.
Okay, all right, thanks for that clarification.
I'd like for Blaine or Bill to clarify that. As I recall, the itinerant merchant permit was a quarterly permit or trimester permit, so we need to make sure we've got that right before the next meeting.
I think what Kelly read looked pretty clear to me, but we'll make sure.
I remember our discussion last time, there was an annual fee if y'all, I mean, when it was in government ops or something, we first got it, but.
All these fees were annual, right?
The food truck thing was.
Yeah, the food truck, yeah.
And it looks like on that 662 that Kelly just read, that
Well,
pretty clearly states that.
well, my question is also, did y'all happen to look at other areas that would be approved on public property? I know we had.
We're not done yet. Really. We're taking these things a piece at a time, and then our next assignment on food trucks is to look at other areas. We have that on our agenda.
Oh, you did? So
Yeah.
I just.
Yeah, we're not done.
That's fine. I just want to make sure that, it's been expressed to.
Yeah.
to us.
Yeah,
and
we're going to look
maybe,
at it. We're going to look at it.
Well, since Kelly got that question clarified, y'all want to put this on the consent
I
agenda?
don't think it's clarified.
Okay.
It is different than what's in background item number 7. Number 7 does reference a trimester, so I think it seems like maybe there's a Scrivener's error in the report.
In something, yeah.
Maybe just say script.
Scrivener.
Okay, y'all ready to go on to the next one?
Bartleby.
We'll get somebody to fix that Scrivener's error for us for next time. Okay, Government Ops Committee, Andy, you want to tell us about that one? Government on Special Event Equipment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I think this is fairly straightforward. There was a request to look at our policy with regards to ACC entities, and I'm assuming mostly leisure services, but there may be some others involved, putting on government-operated events on private property. I guess there had been some interest in that. And it was, our previous policy did not allow for that to occur. So basically, the Government Ops Committee looked at this as a recommendation to allow, assuming this is passed, to allow unified government departments to host events, or to produce events rather, on private property, provided that the private property owner basically signs a whole bunch of waivers.
Any discussion, Ebert?
Yeah,
Ms. Neesmith?
I'm a little confused about what a government-sponsored event is. And I'll just go specifically to, for example, the Athens West Fest, which was not sponsored by the government. It was sponsored by a nonprofit, if you will. And it was a public event on private property, but we were denied the use of the stage. And likewise, if a private event can occur on public property and they can use the stage, then why, there's still something wrong here. If we can't have a public event that may not be government-sponsored, but it's a public event on private property, I think there should be some consideration of being able to use government equipment.
Who was the nonprofit that sponsored that?
Athens West Corridor Group.
Yeah. And it has nonprofit status now?
I'm not sure if it's a 501c3 or just a nonprofit Georgia corporation.
Okay. Well, I'm going to muddy the waters a lot. If we started allowing rental of government equipment for non-government functions on private property, we're going to be in the rental business rather than the government.
Well, what's the difference between that and a private organization like the East Side Group operating on public property and renting public equipment? There's no difference except what property it's on. That's the only difference.
What's y'all's pleasure?
Well, I mean, in terms of the definitions of Commissioner Neesmith asked about what counts as a special event. So under definitions, under attachment 1, it does give some examples: festivals, concerts, races, national celebrations, and sporting competitions. I'm not entirely clear, I have to think about it, but I'm not entirely clear to try and understand what he's trying to do, though.
Well, what you're saying here is this: the government-operated special events. That's what you're allowing this equipment to be used as. It's in government-operated special events.
Government-produced.
Intent of producing government-operated special events for the community on private property. So, in fact, the East Side, and I'm not picking on you, I'm just trying to get this clarified, the East Side was not a government-operated special event. It just happened to be on public property. What's the difference?
Let's let Ms. Dickerson speak.
So the difference is that we had an event on their property, and they have a permit, and their permit allows for rental of their equipment, and that's what we did,
Which we paid for.
which we paid for.
You
So we
you were
weren't-
able to get a permit for renting the equipment because the ordinance allows you to. We're not able to because the ordinance doesn't allow us to. But ours was as much as a government-operated special event as yours was.
But the equipment, it would be like going to a restaurant and renting their tables. They already have, that's part of what they offer their service, and that's why we had it at the park, so we would have access to that equipment.
I can go to a caterer and rent tables from them and put them in a restaurant. So, I mean, have we ever had a government-operated special event on private property? I can't think of one.
A government-sponsored event where?
A government-operated special event
What
on
about
private property.
fireworks? Aren't we doing fireworks off the Classic? Well, I guess at the Classic Center.
Public property.
Yeah, no, just,
The mall,
The mall won't, we can't,
but I think they
what,
do.
we've never had a government-operated
Well,
special
we
event.
actually just had Light the Night at, I think, the Target Shopping Center, which was police department,
Actually,
public safety.
And they use the stage?
Was the stage there? I don't know. I didn't get to go this year.
No.
Mr. Manager, can you provide some clarity? Because I think part of this really came from leisure services wanting to do this, so maybe you can
Sure.
speak to them and.
Well, I think the irony here may be that this is exactly the type of policy that would allow what you've been seeking, and that is a government-sponsored festival on the west side, because we don't have a park out there. And this allows us to hold a government-sponsored event, perhaps on mall properties, And that's something that we were looking at next year, of maybe partnering with them to try to do something out on the west side.
Okay.
Well, that makes sense. That covers my concern,
Yeah.
because if we just open up and say we've got this stage that can be rented to anybody at any time.
No, I understand.
That's not something we want to get into.
I understand that, too.
Okay. You comfortable with it now?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Smith? Okay. Okay, we'll move on.
Thank you for allowing me to get clarified.
Well, I mean,
Commissioner Smith comfortable enough?
that's why we have agenda-setting meetings, so we can get them
That's right.
stuff
Is he
clarified.
comfortable enough to
Okay.
put this on consent, or do you want to talk about it some more next week?
I don't want to
Next
talk about it
month?
anymore.
Okay, let's move on to item number 9.
Well, do we want to put this on
Revisions in the Clarke
consent?
County.
sure.
You want to put this on the consent agenda?
I didn't think we were going to get anything on consent agenda tonight.
Well, Jerry's
Are
now
y'all,
seen
are
the
you happy
light,
with it?
so-
Okay, we'll put that one on consent agenda, Jane. That's, item 9
One
is
down,
the
seven
revisions
to
to the
go.
workplace discrimination and harassment ordinance. Any questions on that for our manager or anybody that y'all would like to?
Consent.
Since it has an ordinance to it, does that mean it can't go on consent?
No, it can go.
Okay, let's do
Okay.
it.
Let's put that one on consent then.
Yes.
Okay. Next one is revisions to the Clarke County travel policy.
Consent?
Consent, okay.
I have one question. For the manager, if that's okay. So some of the language changed here was to change meal reimbursements from per meal to daily meal, which I understand, and it's talking about using the U.S. Federal GSA rules and regulations about per diem amounts, but then it's also requiring a receipt. So my understanding of the federal government's per diems was, the whole point of having a per diem was you were not required to have a receipt, because then it made accounting more easier. So is this suggesting that people could
You have to prove they spent that much.
yeah, well, be up to the maximum per diem of whatever it is, which obviously varies depending on where you're talking about, but they still have to provide a receipt, or?
So it's in the wording, so it's not a per diem. It's a daily allowance.
Oh,
See,
it's a
before
max.
it was by meal, and what we found is that in many places, the dinner was too low. So
And breakfast is too high.
So now you get the allowance for the full day, you submit your itemized receipts, that's an up to figure.
Okay, so it's not a per diem, it's a maximum daily amount.
Yes, sir.
Or you can skip
Okay.
breakfast and have a big dinner.
Pardon?
Or you can skip breakfast and have a big dinner.
Yeah.
As long as you don't go above the,
Yeah.
but the amount is based upon the federal government per diems amount, correct?
It's based on, they have different geographic areas, different cities.
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah.
I'm very
That's the
familiar with the
federal-
GSA
Yeah, yeah.
rules and regs, because that other place on the other side of the street uses it. Okay.
Sharon?
Well, I was just going to say, I think the itemized receipts are necessary too, though, because we have a policy about no alcohol, and when you don't have a receipt, if you don't have an itemized receipt, you can, and we had some of that happen years ago when I was at the county, so.
No more
Somebody else
recently
had
than that.
No more recently than that, that's right.
Y'all
All right,
want
that
to do on
answers my
consent?
question.
Consent.
Okay. Okay, the juvenile court request for contingency funding, and I guess everybody got the change in it. We had a change late this afternoon from 34,300 to 43,000 that they need. Did y'all see that? Consent?
Well, I have a question. So I guess we're going to get this fixed, right? Because it seems like we have had a lot of contingencies for the juvenile court over time, which, of course, not because of they're not turning in the right budget numbers, but it seems like we shouldn't be doing this every few months.
Yeah, in the past, it's been real variable, but since we found the last couple, 3 years, the juvenile regulations are more intensive, and this seems to be the new normal.
Yeah.
So is there a way we're going to, I saw
We'll just-
one of the facts and issues y'all were looking at in FY19, a way to where we don't have to keep taking from contingency, I guess.
Well, the way to fix it is FY20, we would have to.
FY20,
Yeah,
okay.
we'd have to budget a higher amount.
And I don't think it was their bad budgeting. I think it's a change in state law.
Oh, yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. I just think we need to
Contingency,
figure that
guys?
out.
Okay.
Consent.
And 12 is the SPLOST 2020 program, and these are our goals and project selection criteria. And we went over that in a work session. Any questions, Mariah?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. At the August 14th work session, I recommended to staff that we include additional language in the program goals and selection criteria to emphasize equity in our decision-making processes. I noticed that language didn't make it into the version of the program goals and selection criteria that we have in front of us today. So while I support us moving ahead with getting this going and putting this on the September 4th agenda, I do intend to put forth the CDO amending the language here to make sure that we're prioritize economic development and social well-being for communities which have been underserved by previous capital improvement projects and may have not been heard loudly enough in other public input processes previously. And so I just want to let you all know, though I do support us moving forward with having this on the agenda next time.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, I would like to see more of that, the sooner, the better, so that I can understand and make sure, see how it fits in with it. So, yeah, then the better type that up. Sure. I'd like to hear it. See it.
Mr.
I agree. I would,
Neesman.
Commissioner Parker, I'd like to see it too in time that I can study it and call you.
Certainly.
Mr. Harrod?
Well, since we're talking about language that did or didn't make it based on previous conversations, there's a couple of, just on attachment 1, where we talk about primary focus being to improve economic prosperity, social well-being, or environmental protection, and my own pet peeve was, I'd like to see that say and/or.
Yes, and/or.
And then on the next one, this sentence just doesn't make sense. Projects selected should not have a net increase the annual general fund operating expenditures by no more than $4 million in total. So somebody needs to get their red pen out and correct the grammar on that so that it means what we think it means. Because we've got a double negative there, plus it doesn't make sense anyway. So,
And
Mike?
Sure, thank you, Madam Mayor. And that sentence too, I think we probably ought to have a bit more discussion on. I mean, we're asking projects selected should not have a net increase. That's each individual project by more than $4 million. That could end up being a lot of extra money that will.
Supposed to be the total.
Yeah.
Is it
Maybe
is
per-
it for
maybe a
each project or for
percent
the
of the
total?
total?
it's for a total.
Oh, well, I'll just go ahead and say it's still a lot of money. Maybe we should give some points, and maybe we do, to those projects that actually save money, as Commissioner Gertz brought that up at the work session, I believe, that actually save money from that standpoint. And from what I remember at the work session, we're not determining. Are we determining the amount at this vote, and also what could be commission identified projects? Because if we're not, I mean, maybe we have some more time left to discuss about what those could be and what the amount could be, and and address what Commissioner Parker is certainly interested in, so, and others as well. So I'm just wondering, I remember Keith saying we wouldn't, December was sort of a drop dead date. I don't remember.
So December is when you would want to have your designated projects put together?
And the amount?
Well, in this attachment number 1, the second bullet point, under program goals says 9-year period and generating 248 million. So there is a specific time period and amount in what you're about to vote on.
Right, because we didn't, I mean, I don't think we fleshed out at the work session the time period or the amount.
I don't think so either. I think we discussed it a lot, but I don't
Yeah.
think we ever arrived at a time.
Right. It's my understanding. I mean, I'm
Right.
just trying to figure that out. I just
We-
don't remember us.
Remember, it needed to be either less than 6 years or more
Right.
than 8 because of the way the votes fall in the future.
Yeah, I remember that.
And this was just the recommended, and it's subject to y'all's change. But that needs to happen in this voting cycle, because that's going to be transmitted to the public and staff
Sure.
to generate submissions.
Was maybe who's ever putting together, if Commissioner Parker, whoever's putting together Commission Find Option could take that into account, certainly.
6 years.
And take into account not to listen to Commissioner Neesmith on anything from that standpoint.
Well,
So-
you don't.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah,
else?
I wanted to, I wasn't sure if this part helps you, Commissioner Hamby, on 276, it's where we broke down task 7 to be 7A, B, C.
I remember task 7.
Yeah, remember how it got to be D, E, now we have F, G. So those are breaking down those different steps for the projects. And then the summary for this one is going to be the concept for the committee to have,
I guess-
the amount and the years. And then we're going into more detail on vetting the staff stuff so that the Citizens Committee is doing the citizen proposals. That's what I got from this.
Right. Do you mind if I have a follow-up?
Go
I
ahead.
guess I'm just a bit concerned, I mean, Jerry's saying one thing from that standpoint, and I'm saying another thing from another standpoint, but if we haven't seen any of the projects yet, it's kind of hard to determine the amount that we're looking at, especially for designated projects from this commission and other projects that may come forward. I mean, we're almost like pigeonholing ourselves in. I mean, for that matter.
Are you talking about the time frame?
I'm
The
talking about the
amount of money
time.
that's going to
Yeah.
come in?
I mean,
We have no criteria for setting it.
we're fitting the budget into the projects when it should kind of be the other way around, maybe? We fit the projects into, or no, hang on. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we don't know what the projects are, so how do we know how much money we need to spend?
Yeah.
Well, let me offer this as perhaps some help. We just need to sort of finalize what this is probably going to look like so that we can get submissions out. You could make the decision in December, when you do the designated projects, to change that timeline. But if you were going to do this for 1 year,
Right.
we would want to telegraph that early on.
So we could say in a commission-defined option, this will be a 9 or 10-year,
Sure. That's
9
yeah.
or 10-year SPLOST.
Okay, Blaine, I want to make sure I understand because this has gotten me very confused. I'll get you in just a second, Andy. So can we change the length of time of the SPLOST after we see projects, or are we locked into it once we decide?
No, you can change.
Okay. Yeah. Andy?
But if you're close, if it's the difference between 9 and 10, but if it's the difference between 1 and 10, we need to maybe get a little bit closer.
Or if it's
but
6 and 9.
I don't see any harm in
Yeah.
just going ahead, moving forward, have a CDO if you want that language, but we can plan, just like we change the schedule per your direction, come back and we'll, it was just it's a starting point suggestion, that's all.
Who didn't get to speak yet? Andy?
So going back to this issue of not increasing the general fund operating expenditures by more than $4 million, I do think that that's something that we need to have some serious conversation about. That's not quite 4% of the general fund. And we've had some situations in the past, especially in around 2008, 2009, where we built things and we couldn't staff them because we didn't have enough operating funds. Now, partly that was because of the recession, which came, after the previous SPLOST list had been put together. But I think we don't want to get into a situation where we have projects that we build and we can't staff and support, or we delay building them, which is, I think we did on some other projects, because we knew we didn't have the staff for them. The diversion center was one of them, yes. So I think that we need to think about what that number is going to be. And I'm assuming this means 4 years over the 4 million over the total of the life, not 4 million per year,
I
right?
think it's per year.
I think it's per year.
All right, so we definitely need to have a conversation.
Just to be clear, 4 million annually in operating, but it's over the life of the entire 250 million, 270 million program.
But that's still a little shy of 4% of the general fund amount. I mean, the general fund's 110, something like that.
About 130, 120,
130, $120 million, 130. So, I mean, it's 3.5% of the general fund
Sure.
that we would be committing to have to find the revenue for that each year going forward.
And this, again, just a starting point for conversation. This is about what the last was in reference to the fund, so.
Okay, y'all done with this one? Okay, we'll ask Mr. Griffin to come forward and help us with our planning recommendations.
Here's your rest of the list.
Sure, I'll take some more. Thank you, sir.
Ready when you are, Brad.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have 3 items for you tonight. First item is a request to amend an existing RS5 plan development and to also amend the future development map for a property located at 2150 Lexington Road. This is Living Hope Church, previously Cornerstone, before Living Hope purchased from them. They want to, this all kind of stems out of, they constructed kind of a covered entrance to their sanctuary without getting permits. And it was identified about halfway through, pretty minor project, but with it being a planned development, it was one that forced the amendment of the PD prior to completion. So they basically weatherproofed it, stopped the work, and have gone through this process. There were 2 or 3 other things that they wanted to do long-term, so we suggested they go ahead and include those with this PD amendment as well. And then there were a handful of items that kind of have a history, changes that occurred over time. I think this property was actually built and developed back in the early 90s. So we've got a property next door that is, as the church has grown through the years, it's kind of turned itself into a gravel parking lot that was never really permitted, and there have been a couple of buildings go away that have given the ability for some more parking. It's just kind of morphed over the years, and so it was a great opportunity for the church to bring everything into compliance as part of one amendment, and so that's kind of what is going on here, and why you see some timing conditions attached to the end. So it also does require a future land use designation to traditional neighborhood in order just to clean that up as well. And with any PD amendment, if approved, the plans and report become binding. Property located here on the south side of Lexington Road. You can see that is real close to the existing situation and some of the things that we will talk about if my arrow is not going to get up here. But you see bottom left, 2 small curb cuts coming out on the Lexington Road from the gravel parking lot. Those curb cuts need to go away and be closed. And as well as there is an addition that would come off the front of the large building to the back. That is the one that was started and not stopped. And then they also want to build a third building to the left-hand side of the property as well. That is a longer-term project. Stormwater issues need to be brought into compliance and cleaned up from years of modifications. And so all of those things are proposed. And then if you look kind of up just to the north of the parking lot in the right-hand side, that first building that comes off of Lexington Heights is also part of the church property. That is the one that we've indicated to them if they are interested in pursuing the drug rehabilitation facility, it would be in that building, and it goes through a separate process. And you see that as well in one of the conditions. So kind of a mouthful, but that's long and short where we are. That would be the change in future development to traditional neighborhood, if approved. Existing zoning would stay the same. This was the 93 plan that was approved. That plan approved the expansion of what is now the sanctuary, was originally approved as a family life center, the larger building that I just showed you to the rear. You can see at that point there were two houses that were up in the area that now is largely a gravel parking lot that have been removed. This is their proposed new master plan that would eliminate those curb cuts, provide better interconnection from a single point of access on Lexington as well as two still on Lexington Heights. And then you see in kind of the darker shades, the two buildings, the youth building in the top center, and then the addition of the covered opening to what is now their worship center. Planning Commission recommendations come in some parts, really, to approve the future land use, to approve the amendment to the PD with the conditions, one of which there was some confusion in their written report about the buffer along Lexington Heights potentially being removed. I don't think it was ever their intention to remove it, and so they've certainly agreed to keep it, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. We had asked for a 12-month period on some of the, what we deemed to be some of the more critical components of the PD. Our concern from staff was the approval of the PD will allow them to go ahead and complete the small extension of the worship center and go ahead and get that finished up under the PD. But a PD generally does not compel you to complete it at a specific time unless conditioned to do so. And so some of the issues like, it's fairly important to get the stormwater, the parking lot curb cuts brought into compliance. There was a fence that's out of compliance on the eastern side of the property that needs to be revised as well. And then exactly what you're going to do with that building on Lexington Heights that I showed you with regard to whether or not it is drug rehabilitation or not. And so Planning Commission, they asked for a little additional time from the 12 months. And so the recommendation to you that you'll be voting on is to allow them 2 years to basically to fix that fence, but the biggest one will be to close the two driveways on Lexington Road. That's going to require then landscaping to go in along that buffer to be enclosed, and will require, as you can see there, the new driveway and parking that loops around to tie into the existing parking lot. They felt they need some more time financially to get that work done, and the Planning Commission saw fit to do so. That top left is the building that they need to clarify use, and if it is to be used for drug rehab, need to go through that process. And then you can see in the bottom right that there is an existing buffer hedge there already, and that will remain in place. So with all of that, the recommendation from the Planning Commission was to approve.
And Ms. Parker, this is in your district. Do you have any comments that you'd like to make? Or
I'm content with supporting the Planning Commission's recommendations and seeing from the agenda next time around.
Anybody else? Okay, we move on to the next one, Brad.
Okay. 5378 Atlanta Highway. This is a straight rezone from RS8 single family to employment industrial. You don't see a lot of straight rezonings, but this is one of them. This is a piece of property that the zoning district they're requesting is currently compliant with our newly adopted future land use plan. The EI designation would allow for several commercial light manufacturing uses, but there is not a plan or voluntary conditions associated with this plan as submitted by the applicant. Property you see here at the corner of Fowler Mill Road and Atlanta Highway. To the right, you see the existing employment office, employment industrial zoning classification, as well as property directly across to the south is within the city limits of Bogart, but to the west of there is more similar zoning in an employment industrial classification. See where the little red square is on the screen? That is the property. It's between the Atlanta Highway and the railroad track to the north, and a fairly large construction material supply company located along the tracks there, just again north of this property. You can, if you look in the very bottom right-hand corner, you can see proximity to Caterpillar at the building just down at the bottom to this property. About 1.5 acres. There's not sewer out there right now, which will limit the uses that could be placed on this property under the employment industrial zone with regard to intensity and size. Future development map, it is currently part of a larger area that's identified as employment with regard to our comprehensive plan. And you see again there, the proposed change would take it from the yellow, which is RSA, to EI, employment industrial. Currently undeveloped. A lot of discussion on this one about site distance issues with Fowler Mill and Atlanta Highway. This picture's taken from the entrance of Fowler Mill Road at Atlanta Highway looking east. And so you can see there is some vertical curve in the road that somewhat limits site distance. With that, Planning Commission, they discussed that. There were some concerns from neighbors that showed up about it. Ultimately, what was recommended by the Planning Commission was to approve it, and the limitation there being, to get this exactly right, that no access directly to Atlanta Highway with regard to curb cuts, that all access would come from Fowler Mill Road. That was the only suggested condition, and it was a 7-to-1 vote to support the requested rezoning.
Mr. Neesmith, do you have anything to say about this?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, this is obviously an area, and the neighbors realize it, that someday will be employment industrial, perhaps that whole section west of Fowler Road and east of Fowler Road. But the traffic in the intersection of Fowler Road and Atlanta Highway is quite problematic. It's already a dangerous intersection. That's why the Planning Commission agreed to restrict the access to Atlanta Highway directly from the property with a curb cut. So that's good, but the intensity of its use is going to have a great deal to do with its effects on traffic. So I'm going to be making a commission-defined option that eliminates some of the possible uses in the EI zone to eliminate a lot of additional traffic into and out of this property. The petitioner does not own the property. Petitioner is going to buy the property, but he's not sure what he's going to use it for. He does have some businesses elsewhere, and perhaps this will become one of those kinds of businesses, and I think that my CDO will accommodate that. So that's where I'm going with this.
Any other discussion? Okay. Move on,
Okay.
Brad.
Next item's actually 3. You're going to have 3 ordinances on this one when you vote on it in March or April at this one, and I'll explain all that later. But 3 separate properties, they are single-family attached units on their own lots that are all part of one building on Highland Park Drive. 190, 192, 194 is a special use request for each property in the RM1 district for halfway houses. They will be coming to you as 3 separate ones. So we have restrictions under our ordinance that restricts the number of residents per house to 10. The proposal here would be for 7 in each one. The special use and the zoning is compatible with the mixed-density residential future land use, and if ultimately approved, the binding report, site plan, and existing architecture would become binding. See the subject property here located on Highland Park Drive. The plat showing that it is 3 existing lots. existing condition of the property. And Planning Commission recommendations were to approve each of these three. Now with this, these are for halfway houses. State law states that any zoning decision related to the approval of a halfway house or a drug rehabilitation facility goes through a different process than you may be used to with our local zoning actions that we take. The way this is going to work, you will hold a public hearing at your September meeting for each of these three properties. Take public comment. You can discuss it at the close of that public comment, but you cannot vote on it to take action for a minimum of 6 months or a maximum of 9. So that's going to push us out to March to June of next year before you can actually vote. So we will hold the public hearing. We will continue to work with the applicant, and then more than likely in the month of March, we will come back to you again. This will not go back to the Planning Commission, just comes back through this process. And I would suggest at that point, we hold a second public hearing and you vote on it, just like any other zoning items on the agenda that night. But just want to make sure that's clear that you will not be taking action at your September meeting other than to receive public comment and hold the hearing because of state law. That's Planning Commission recommendation for the three are to approve.
Andy, I believe this is in your set area.
So Brad, my understanding is that they're already operating out there. Is this basically just to bring a non-conforming use into
That's our
compliance?
understanding at this point, yes.
Okay,
They are
so it's
working
not
with
a
the
new
state.
facility, it's simply they haven't filed the correct paperwork or something, and
We think this, yes, this is similar, it's our understanding to some of the personal care homes you've seen, that some additional paperwork requirements at the state level have triggered them to us to become compliant, and they are working with us as well as with the state. The state understands they are in our process and are giving the necessary extensions that would allow them to remain open while it goes through this process until you take final action next spring.
And so in the interim, given that they are operating there as we speak, and given that this is to basically bring them into compliance with the new regulations, I guess, coming from the state, but in the interim, the state has basically said, well, I guess this should be a question. Has the state basically said they can continue to operate until we finalize this? Is that?
That's my understanding from talking to the applicant. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Any other questions? I have a question. What is the definition of a halfway house? Because I'm trying to decide what the difference in this and some drug rehab where we have people that are in longer term.
I mean, we have a definition in the zoning ordinance, but the kind of the pared down version of it is that if more than 50% of your residents have been placed there by court for some type of an offense, and they're not self-check-in, you recognize that you have an issue that you need to receive care, and you go to a facility and you check yourself in, but you're required to be there based on an order. More than half of the people there are under that scenario. We consider it a halfway house.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. well,
Okay.
We will finish this and go into executive session, so we'll ask our speakers, please.
Take a break, Mayor.
Yeah, y'all take a quick break if you need to. Try to make it as brief as possible, so, because I think our executive session is going to be short.